Hi there. Before we begin, I just want to say, if you've ever walked away from a conversation and replayed every word in your head, you're not alone. This is the story of how I went from being stuck in endless loops of overthinking ... to finally finding peace with who I am. From social anxiety to self-acceptance, how I stopped overthinking. Let me take you back to where it all began. The silence of my apartment was a battlefield. Each room, a theater of war where the casualties were my self-esteem and any semblance of inner peace. The enemy? My own mind. Specifically, the endless, relentless replay button that activated the moment any social interaction concluded. It wasn't a casual reflection. It was a forensic dissection, a relentless autopsy performed on every word, every gesture, every facial expression exchanged. My name is Elias Thorne, and I am cursed, or perhaps just afflicted, with a condition I've come to term Conversational Replay Disorder. It started subtly, innocently enough, in my early teens. A fleeting awkward moment at a school dance, a slightly mispronounced word during a class presentation. These minor blips, which most people would shrug off, became monumental failures in my internal narrative. They looped in my mind, growing in significance with each iteration, transforming into irrefutable evidence of my inherent social ineptitude. Over time, the replays became more frequent, more intense, and more consuming. It wasn't just the big, obviously embarrassing moments. It was every interaction, no matter how mundane. A simple good morning to the barista, a brief exchange with a neighbor about the weather, all fodder for the relentless internal critic. My days were structured not by tasks or deadlines, but by the looming threat of social interaction. Each encounter was a minefield, fraught with the potential for devastating errors that would detonate into hours, sometimes days, of agonizing replays. I developed elaborate avoidance strategies. I ordered groceries online to minimize contact with cashiers. I walked a circuitous route to work to avoid bumping into acquaintances. I even considered fabricating a medical condition that would necessitate wearing a face mask permanently, providing a shield against the perceived scrutiny of others. My apartment, once a sanctuary, became a prison of my own making. After work, I would collapse onto the couch, the adrenaline slowly draining from my system, only to be replaced by a creeping sense of dread. It was the calm before the storm, the moment before the replays began. I would mentally rewind the day, scrutinizing every conversation, searching for flaws, for evidence of my inadequacy. A slight hesitation in my voice during a meeting, a perceived lack of enthusiasm in my email response, a barely perceptible eye roll from a colleague, all amplified into catastrophic social faux pas. The replays weren't passive observations. They were active interrogations. I would grill myself relentlessly. Why did you say that? What did you mean by that? How did they interpret that? I would analyze tone, body language, and context, searching for hidden meanings, for subtle cues that I had somehow offended or alienated the other person. The worst part was the fabrication, the stories I would create to explain the perceived negativity. They probably think I'm arrogant. They probably think I'm stupid. They probably think I'm trying too hard. These narratives, born from my own insecurities, would solidify into unshakable beliefs, poisoning my relationships and eroding my self-worth. The physical toll was immense. The constant anxiety manifested as chronic muscle tension, particularly in my neck and shoulders. I suffered from frequent headaches, insomnia, and digestive issues. My appetite fluctuated wildly. Sometimes I would binge eat to numb the pain. Other times I would lose all interest in food, the replays churning in my stomach like acid. My hair, once thick and lustrous, began to thin prematurely. I was aging rapidly, both physically and emotionally, consumed by the relentless demands of my internal critic. One particularly brutal episode involved a casual conversation with my neighbor, Sarah, about her new dog. It was a seemingly innocuous exchange, filled with pleasantries and shared admiration for the adorable golden retriever puppy. But the moment I closed my apartment door, the replays began. I fixated on a slight pause I had made before answering a question about the dog's breed. Did she think I was uninterested? Did she think I was judging her choice of dog? Did she think I was weird? The replays spiraled out of control. I replayed the conversation dozens of times, each iteration uncovering new layers of perceived social failure. I imagined Sarah gossiping about me to other neighbors, painting me as a socially awkward recluse. I envisioned myself being ostracized from the building, forced to live in perpetual isolation. That night, I barely slept. The replays continued unabated, fueled by my anxiety and self-doubt. I tossed and turned, my mind racing, my body aching. By morning, I was a shell of my former self, exhausted, demoralized, and desperate for relief. It was then, in the depths of my despair, that I stumbled upon a potential lifeline. While mindlessly scrolling through online articles, I came across a piece about rumination and cognitive distortions. The article described a pattern of negative thinking that resonated deeply with my own experiences. It explained how rumination, the act of repeatedly dwelling on negative thoughts and feelings, could exacerbate anxiety and depression. It also outlined common cognitive distortions, such as catastrophizing, expecting the worst possible outcome, and personalization, assuming that everything is about you. As I read the article, a glimmer of hope flickered within me. Perhaps I wasn't simply a hopeless social misfit. Perhaps there was a name for what I was experiencing, a framework for understanding and addressing it. I devoured the article, eager to learn more about rumination and cognitive distortions. I discovered techniques for challenging negative thoughts, for reframing situations, and for practicing self-compassion. The first step was to acknowledge the problem. I had spent years trying to suppress the replays, to ignore the internal critic. But the more I resisted, the stronger it became. I realized that I needed to confront my anxiety head-on to understand its roots and to develop strategies for managing it. I started by keeping a journal. Each time I experienced a replay, I would write down the details of the conversation, the negative thoughts that arose, and the cognitive distortions that were at play. It was a painful process, forcing me to confront my deepest insecurities. But it was also incredibly empowering. By putting my thoughts on paper, I was able to gain some distance from them, to see them more objectively. I also began practicing mindfulness meditation. At first, it was incredibly difficult. My mind was so cluttered with replays and negative thoughts that I couldn't focus on my breath for more than a few seconds. But with practice, I gradually learned to quiet the internal noise, to observe my thoughts without judgment, and to return to the present moment. One of the most challenging aspects of my recovery was confronting my perfectionism. I had always strived for social perfection, believing that any flaw or imperfection would lead to rejection and ridicule. I realized that this unattainable standard was fueling my anxiety and driving the replays. I began to challenge my perfectionistic beliefs, to accept that I was human, and that it was okay to make mistakes. I also started to experiment with new social behaviors. I forced myself to engage in conversations, even when I felt anxious. I practiced making small talk, asking open-ended questions, and actively listening to others. It was terrifying at first, but with each successful interaction, my confidence grew. There were setbacks, of course. Days when the replays were particularly intense, when I felt overwhelmed by anxiety and self-doubt. But I learned to be patient with myself, to acknowledge my struggles, and to keep moving forward. I also sought professional help. I found a therapist who specialized in anxiety disorders. She helped me to identify the underlying causes of my anxiety, to develop coping mechanisms, and to challenge my negative thought patterns. Therapy was a transformative experience. It provided me with a safe space to explore my emotions, to confront my fears, and to develop a healthier relationship with myself. My therapist helped me to understand that my anxiety wasn't a sign of weakness or failure, but rather a symptom of a deeper emotional wound. Together, we explored my childhood experiences, my relationships, and my beliefs about myself. We identified patterns of negative thinking that had been ingrained in me since childhood. We also developed strategies for challenging those patterns and for replacing them with more positive and realistic beliefs. One of the most valuable lessons I learned in therapy was the importance of self-compassion. I had spent so many years criticizing myself, judging myself, and punishing myself for my perceived social failures. My therapist helped me to understand that I deserved kindness, understanding, and acceptance, just like everyone else. I began to practice self-compassion by treating myself with the same care and concern that I would offer to a friend. When I made a mistake, I would remind myself that everyone makes mistakes, and that it didn't mean I was a bad person. When I felt overwhelmed by anxiety, I would take a break, do something relaxing, and remind myself that the feeling would pass. Over time, the replays began to diminish in intensity and frequency. I was still aware of my social interactions, but I no longer felt compelled to dissect them endlessly. I was able to let go of the negative thoughts and feelings, to accept myself as I was, flaws and all. I even started to enjoy social interactions. I found that when I wasn't preoccupied with self-criticism, I was able to connect with others more authentically. I laughed more, I listened more, and I felt more alive. My relationship with Sarah, my neighbor, improved dramatically. I stopped interpreting her every word and gesture as a sign of disapproval. I started to see her as a kind, compassionate person who genuinely cared about me. We began to spend more time together, walking our dogs, sharing meals, and supporting each other through difficult times. One day, Sarah confided in me that she had also struggled with anxiety. She told me that she had spent years worrying about what other people thought of her, and that she had only recently begun to overcome her fears. Her vulnerability inspired me to be even more open and honest about my own struggles. We became each other's support system, offering encouragement, understanding, and a safe space to be ourselves. My journey to overcome conversational replay disorder was not easy. It required courage, commitment, and a willingness to challenge my deepest beliefs. But it was the most rewarding thing I have ever done. I learned to love myself, to accept myself, and to live my life to the fullest. The silence in my apartment is now a peaceful one, filled with the quiet confidence of self-acceptance and the comforting sounds of a life well lived. The battlefield is quiet now, the war won not with weapons, but with understanding, compassion, and the unwavering belief in my own worth. But the story doesn't end there. Overcoming the CRD was a battle won, but maintaining that victory required vigilance. I learned that anxiety, like a persistent weed, could always try to creep back in if left unchecked. Therefore, my health journey became a continuous process of self-care and proactive mental health management. Firstly, I doubled down on mindfulness. Initially a tool to combat the replays, it morphed into a way of life. I dedicated 30 minutes each morning to meditation, focusing on my breath, acknowledging thoughts without judgment, and cultivating a sense of presence. This practice wasn't just about quieting my mind. It was about training it to be more resilient, more adaptable, and more accepting. I also made significant changes to my diet and exercise routine. I had always known that physical health was linked to mental health, but it wasn't until I experienced the transformative power of these changes that I truly understood the connection. I cut out processed foods, sugar, and excessive caffeine, all of which exacerbated my anxiety. I replaced them with whole, nutrient-rich foods that nourished my body and my brain. Exercise became my daily ritual. I started with gentle walks in the park, gradually increasing the intensity and duration of my workouts. I discovered a love for yoga, which helped me to release tension in my body and to cultivate a sense of inner peace. Exercise wasn't just about physical fitness. It was about releasing endorphins, reducing stress hormones, and improving my overall mood. Sleep hygiene became a top priority. I established a consistent sleep schedule, going to bed and waking up at the same time each day, even on weekends. I created a relaxing bedtime routine, which included a warm bath, a cup of chamomile tea, and a few minutes of reading. I made sure my bedroom was dark, quiet, and cool, creating an optimal environment for sleep. I also became more mindful of my social media consumption. I realized that scrolling through endless feeds of curated content was fueling my anxiety and contributing to my feelings of inadequacy. I limited my social media use to specific times of the day, and I unfollowed accounts that made me feel bad about myself. Perhaps the most important change I made was to cultivate deeper connections with others. I had spent so many years isolating myself, fearing judgment and rejection. I realized that human connection was essential for my well-being. I started to reach out to friends and family, to spend more time with them, and to be more open and honest about my struggles. I also joined a support group for people with anxiety disorders. It was incredibly comforting to connect with others who understood what I was going through. We shared our experiences, our coping mechanisms, and our hopes for the future. I realized that I wasn't alone in my struggles, and that there was strength in community. I also learned to celebrate my successes, no matter how small. I had spent so many years focusing on my failures and shortcomings. I realized that it was important to acknowledge my progress, to appreciate my strengths, and to give myself credit for all that I had accomplished. I started to keep a gratitude journal, writing down things I was thankful for each day. This practice helped me to shift my focus from the negative to the positive and to cultivate a sense of optimism. Finally, I learned to accept that setbacks were inevitable. There would be days when my anxiety would flare up, when the replays would return, when I would feel overwhelmed and discouraged. But I learned not to beat myself up about it. I learned to treat myself with compassion, to acknowledge my struggles, and to keep moving forward. My journey with conversational replay disorder has taught me invaluable lessons about mental health, self-compassion, and the power of human connection. It has transformed me from a fearful, anxious recluse into a confident, resilient, and compassionate human being. And while I still experience moments of anxiety, I now have the tools and the resources to manage it effectively. I am no longer defined by my anxiety. I am defined by my ability to overcome it. My experience also fueled a desire to help others facing similar challenges. I started volunteering at a local mental health organization, sharing my story and offering support to those struggling with anxiety. I discovered that helping others was incredibly therapeutic, giving me a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I also created a blog where I shared my experiences, my insights, and my strategies for managing anxiety. I was overwhelmed by the positive response. People from all over the world reached out to me, thanking me for sharing my story and for providing them with hope and inspiration. I realized that my struggles had not been in vain. They had given me a unique perspective and a powerful voice. I decided to dedicate my life to helping others overcome their mental health challenges. I went back to school and earned a degree in psychology. I became a therapist specializing in anxiety disorders. Now I spend my days helping others to overcome their fears, to challenge their negative thoughts, and to live their lives to the fullest. It is incredibly rewarding work. I see my own journey reflected in the struggles of my clients. I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed by anxiety, to feel trapped by negative thoughts, and to feel hopeless about the future. But I also know that recovery is possible. I have seen it happen, not only in my own life, but in the lives of countless others. My life is not perfect. I still have moments of anxiety, moments of self-doubt, and moments when the replays threaten to return. But I am no longer afraid of those moments. I know that I have the strength and the resilience to overcome them. I have learned to embrace my imperfections, to celebrate my strengths, and to live my life with purpose and passion. The battle may never truly be over, but I am now equipped for the long war, armed with self-awareness, self-compassion, and an unwavering commitment to my health and well-being. And so, my journey continues, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of self-care. The silence in my apartment remains, but now it's the sound of peace, of acceptance, and of a life lived authentically, one conversation, one moment, one replay at a time. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, even just a little, I want you to know this. You're not broken. You're human. And healing doesn't mean perfection. It means progress, compassion, and learning to breathe again after years of holding your breath. If you're on your own journey with anxiety or overthinking, I hope this gave you a little hope, or at least reminded you that you're not alone. If it did, consider liking this video, subscribing for more stories like this, or sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Take care of yourself. You're worth the effort. And I'll see you in the next story.